Hello. Welcome to the panel. Please feel free to take a seat. My name is Charles Duhigg. I'm your moderator today. And before we jump into it, let me just ask, I got in late last night. Was there anything interesting on television? I'm glad you laughed. I was going to say, too soon? Is it a little... I imagine a couple of people woke up feeling a little gloomy this morning. But there is a lot of reasons to feel really good about what's happening in America. And I think that this panel today is going to exemplify that. We're going to be talking about post-secondary education. We're going to talk about education in general and the value of liberal arts. Before we start, I was looking at some statistics. So in 1974, 50 years ago, 40% of US adults were in a post-secondary education program 2 years after graduating from high school. So 40%. Today, that number is 62%. Right? We have more people going to college. We have more people going to community college, going to trade schools. Now, that being said, as you all know, only about 54% of Americans have post-secondary degrees. And so there's a real opportunity for us to talk about how do we make this kind of education more accessible to people? Why is it so meaningful to folks? And so I'm so pleased to be joined today by Dan Porterfield, the CEO and president of Aspen, the Aspen Institute, and some of the students that he knows from Franklin and Marshall College. And rather than introducing you guys, I'm going to, let me ask you just to introduce yourself, if you don't mind. And I'm going to ask you a question. Okay. Which is, you went to Franklin and Marshall. What surprised you the most? Because all three of you are either first generation or an immigrant to this country. What surprised you about that college experience? Take it away.
So my name is Giraldo. I was actually born in Colombia, South America. I came to the United States in 2001 and grew up in Miami. And from the very beginning as an immigrant, my parents told me, we can't afford to pay for your college education, so that's something you're going to have to earn on your own. You're going to have to get a scholarship. And I did. I ended up as part of the Posse Foundation, which takes 10 students who are leaders within their own field, and my particular posse is a STEM posse, so we're all interested in the sciences and math and technology. And we basically came to Franklin and Marshall, and that's where I met Dr. Porterfield. And my experience, I think the biggest surprise that I had coming to Franklin and Marshall was the level of involvement that I could have in all these different fields, whether it was science or the arts or sports. It was incredible. And I had so many different opportunities in these fields that I could have chosen to go into them. And I built connections in so many different fields, and that was truly amazing for me.
Donnell, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to everyone, telling us a little bit about yourself, and I have a slightly different question.
Yep.
What challenge was the most surprising challenge when you got to Franklin and Marshall?
So for me, hi everyone, I'm Donnell Bailey. I am from New Orleans, Louisiana, born and raised, and I grew up specifically in the 5th Ward of New Orleans. If you've ever been, it's considered mid-city. For me, a little more about my education. I attended KIPP schools, and so if you're familiar with the charter school network, after Hurricane Katrina, my family evacuated to Houston, and in Houston there was a school called KIPP New Orleans West College Prep, which was a school that was only for students from New Orleans who were displaced by the hurricane. And so fast forward to going through KIPP schools, I wound up going to Metairie Park Country Day in New Orleans for high school, because at the time, there were no KIPP high schools in New Orleans. And if you could imagine, it was such a shift going from a traditional public charter school to a country day school on the other side of town, having to take 2 buses and a streetcar. And it being a completely different academic environment, socioeconomic environment. And so in some ways, my country day experience prepared me for F&M, which is where I wound up learning about Franklin and Marshall at Country Day. And so when I got to Franklin and Marshall, I went as part of a multicultural overnight fly-in experience where the school was looking for young students, young student leaders of color on their high school campuses, which was part of the talent recruitment strategy that Dan started at FNM. And the first day, I remember this clearly, that I met Dan, we were in a Hackman auditorium, and I went up to Dan and extended my hand to him, and before I could even get a word out of my mouth, he goes, "You're Donnell Bailey. You're the kid who's from New Orleans, and your family went through Hurricane Katrina." And this was before I even had a chance to tour the campus or sit in a classroom. And so for me, I think it was an immediate yes in many ways because of the sense of relationship that was already created before I even got to campus. And so I think as part of my overall experience, the most challenging thing was the figuring out how to navigate the sense of imposter syndrome, right? Navigating my sense of belonging and figuring out the smart cuts, right, of getting through, because I'll never forget being in the student center and looking completely sleep deprived during finals, and my dean came up to me and she goes, "You know, you don't have to read it all." And it was a shock to me, right, which then led to learning different skills and learning different ways, right, to do the work the smart way and not necessarily working myself harder.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that you don't get often if you're from a first-generation family, right? There are, right, just things that you have to navigate and figure out with the support of mentors.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a supportive community.
Thank you for that. And Katrina, let me ask you a slightly different question. Please tell the crowd a little bit about yourself. And then also, what's the most surprising thing that you learned at Franklin and Marshall?
So, hello everybody. I am Katrina Wachter. I'm currently a forensic psychiatrist. I just graduated my psychiatry forensic fellowship 2 weeks ago now. Thank you. I grew up in a very small, very rural, very homogeneous town outside of Allentown, Pennsylvania. I am a first-generation college student. I always knew that I wanted to go to college. My parents were extremely supportive of me going to college. It just wasn't something that was in the cards for them necessarily. Not that they couldn't do it, it just didn't work out for them necessarily. So when I was looking for a college, I knew that I wanted to go to a place where I could practice both my skills in medicine, pre-medicine, but also my other passion of singing. So I grew up singing basically anywhere that I could. Anytime there was a choir in school, chamber singers, anything like that, I tried to join it. Never had the opportunity to take singing lessons. So when I came to FNM, I actually got to meet Miss Gwen Geyer, who's the artist in residence, who does singing lessons for credit. So I was like, okay, I can go to college, be pre-med, take lessons from this very talented, very accomplished singer, and get college credit for it, which was awesome. So Franklin and Marshall was actually the last college I visited. I visited maybe 25 colleges during my search, and I walked off the campus that day being like, I think this is it, that gut feeling that you get. I was able to go through college, and then I actually, my senior year of college, joined the military. So I am a captain in the United States Army as well. Thank you. I joined the Health Professions Scholarship Program, which I only knew about because a recruiter came onto campus, gave us free lunch, which college students will never say no to, and they talked about the program, said, we'll pay for medical school if you will be a doctor for the United States Army. And again, that gut feeling, right? I'm a big gut feeling girl. It felt like the right thing. My parents were supportive. So I joined the military, went through med school, Like I said, just finished psychiatry residency at Walter Reed, and now I'm actually headed to South Korea in a month to be stationed out there, helping our service members out there. So that's a little bit about me. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And before we start grilling Dan, because I got a bunch of questions for you, I just want to brag on these three because they're being very modest. Carolina is a resident, just started your residency in medical school in South Carolina.
Internal medicine.
Internal medicine, fantastic. Donnell worked in the Obama White House with his brother's keeper. He now oversees Teach Plus, which is an education organization. And Katrina, though she didn't mention it, not only is a captain, but she just got promoted. So she's almost
Almost a major.
Almost a major. Almost wow. So, okay, so let me ask you. The reason I know about these three folks and that they're here today is because you wrote this book, and you feature their stories and other stories in this book. And I want to ask you about that. Before I do, taking back to 2011, you have just been named the president of Franklin and Marshall. You walk onto that campus. What are you seeing? What's your mission? What do you want to do there?
Thank you, Charles, and thank you, everybody, for being here. My wife, Karen Hurling, is here, so she walked on the campus with me, and I think the first thing I want to do is keep our marriage intact. We had lived in a dormitory at Georgetown, and we're living in a dormitory for 8 years. It was the 8th year. And so the second thing, I wanted to convince my children that it was a good idea to leave the dorm where they ruled the roost 365 a year, running around and owning the place, to this new place where nobody knew them. And I also want to point out that Christian Hartrampt, who is our chief of staff and coordinates so much of the Aspen Institute, was a student at Franklin and Marshall College. So now I know I wanted to meet Christian that day, although I didn't know him yet. So what I wanted to do was engage the dialogue of the campus about how the campus saw its strengths, its hopes, its aspirations, its purpose. And so I went and had 80 meetings in the first 10 weeks. It was like 3 or 4 a day with the chemistry department, with people in the cafeteria, with the registrar's office, with the athletics program. Then I went out to all these high schools that had students going to F&M and said, what do you trust F&M to deliver and to be for your students? What have you experienced that's been F&M on its best day, on its worst day for your students? Went and did alumni engagement. So really the first couple months was that classic intensive listening experience. And I did hear, and this is one of the benefits of leadership transitions, you hear ideas that people have had inside that they would like to get out into the conversation, and you connect dots for the community that they haven't thought to connect because they didn't have somebody asking them, what do you think? And so I did hear 3 things that really came together beautifully, but I couldn't have planned it. One was that the faculty of Franklin and Marshall, which is a very, very rigorous school, you can ask them, very, very rigorous. They were saying, our student body is uneven, and there are a lot of students in the classroom, or at least a critical mass, that are not engaged. And we're a hard school, we really challenge them, and the grades end up being lower. The engagement's not there, we're worried about that, we're worried. And then a second theme, which came from some faculty and from some students and from others that believed in the school, was, this is a great school, it's a hard school, it's like, University of Chicago, a liberal arts college model, a lot of research, a lot of things happening, great launch pad, but we're not as inclusive as almost any school that's like us. And it's true that the Pell Grant enrollment, those are the students from the lower 50% of incomes, was about 8% at that time. And the African American student and Latino student enrollments were quite low. But they were saying, like, we wish it were better. And then there was an alumni group that had worked their brains out at F&M. And I'm telling you, they all said the same thing, some version of earlier era. It was a grind. Richard Plepler was the head of HBO. He was one of them that said that. Ken Melman, who's the head of the Republican Party, was one of them that said that to me. Patty Harris, who's the head of Bloomberg Philanthropy, said that to me. This is like distinguished people that really worked hard and got propelled and loved it. But nobody knows about us. Those 3 themes, I wasn't smart enough to go in there knowing what they should want. I wanted to hear. I realized could connect around a single strategy, which we called the talent strategy. And it was to triple our financial aid budget so that we could go out around the country, like Bill Gates going around the world with money to invest in people, and say, we've got scholarships. Where are there engaged students that really want to make it count? And to the faculty that were worried that we wouldn't have engaged students, I'm telling you, those first-gen financial aid eligible students out there, they're going to make it count. I had a lot of experience at Georgetown working with that particular part of the student community. They're out there. You're going to love it. And to the student community that was thinking, well, would we be a good place? Would we be a good place for more Latino students, for more African American students? We're going to be a great place because the students are going to make it. And then to the alumni, it's like, let's show the country that we've become a stronger, rigorous school if we have a much more inclusive student body. So we tripled the aid budget quickly. We tripled the enrollment of everything. Pell Grant students is the overall category, but immigrant students, African American students, rural students, homeschooled students, everything tripled. And the school became really even stronger, much more even across the student body. The students who were not necessarily aid eligible had more engaged peers. The faculty who were nervous that we don't have enough social workers for this program, later realized we didn't need social workers. We just needed engaged students. And so it really worked. The three here are obviously exemplary, obviously, but they're also representative. And they're representative of the talent all across this country.
And I want to ask you guys about what that experience was like a little bit more, and Dan, more about your book. Before I do, let me just ask the audience, how many folks in this room were first generation in their family to go to college? Okay, well, that's a big number. So go ahead and keep your hands up, if you don't mind. How many folks in this room were Pell Grant recipients? And how many folks in this room had a non-traditional college experience? Maybe took some time off, maybe you started a couple of years after you graduated from college. And how many folks in this room have kids and you are thinking a lot about their college experience? Okay, I think almost everyone in the room at some point raised their hand, right? These issues,
grandkids count too.
What's that?
Grandkids.
Your grandkids count too. Grandkids, yeah. You're probably even more worried about your grandkids going to college because, yeah, their parents make some interesting choices. I think one of the things, we tend to talk about college as something that is sort of one size fits all, right? That you go and you have 4 years. We tend to talk about it as something that either you're first generation and you're getting into it or you're not. And of course, the truth is that the stories are so diverse, the schools are so diverse, the experience you can have is so diverse. And in many ways, the history of this country with the GI Bill after World War II is the story of education changing lives, post-secondary education in particular, remaking entire cities in the nation. Now, let me ask you guys. So you get to Franklin and Marshall. I'm imagining before you show up, you're talking to friends, family, guidance counselors, and somebody at some point has to say, I'm not sure a liberal arts look, here's the thing, if you go to some place where you can study, it's a science school, it's going to make it easier to get into medical school. It's a school that's focused on politics. It's a school that's focused on entrepreneurialism. Did you feel any pressure to try and choose a different kind of school? And how did you navigate that with yourselves and your families and your friends?
Go ahead, you start.
Yeah, so I would say I didn't feel a lot of pressure from my family. And so I was raised by my mom and grandmother, and they both worked working class jobs. My mom worked at McDonald's, my grandmother at a hotel cafeteria. My mom at the time was very heartbroken that I was deciding to go all the way up to Amish country. Of all places, and also she didn't know what it was. They didn't know what it was, and so it wasn't pressure, but it was having to have iterations of conversations of what this meant. And I think they could have said no, right? They could have said you should go to Tulane, which I actually did wind up going for my master's, but they could have said stay at home or go to a state school, but they allowed me to define, right, what my own path would look like. And so as soon as I got to F&M, I thought that I would be a government major, but I wound up being a sociology major. And the reason why was because I thought that government was too structural. It wasn't relevant to what I particularly wanted to study. And I remember taking my first sociology course. And in that course, we talked about issues around race and issues around class and issues around power. And for me, it was a realization that, oh, so everything that I have seen my entire life, right, isn't by happenstance, right? Everything that I've seen around me, right, isn't random, but that these are systematic issues, structural issues, right, that we have the power to unstructure. And so an epiphany that I had once in a sociology, I was writing a paper, and I remember thinking about the language that we use around poverty, such as poverty-stricken, right? We always say, oh, that is a poverty-stricken neighborhood. And if you think about the word, it almost makes us feel as if we can't do anything about it. And so I shifted the language in my paper from saying poverty-stricken to saying poverty-structured. Right? These are poverty-structured issues in neighborhoods, which means that we do have power to do something about it. This was also at the heart of my engagement and involvement at FNM as well, and so I had the pleasure of serving as both my class president and student body president. And fun fact, when I was elected, I became the first Black student in the history of the college to serve as student body president. And when I think about my family, when I think about my mom and grandmother, when I think about my great-grandparents, my great-grandfather was a sharecropper who picked cotton in the sizzling heat of Louisiana. My great-grandmother, she canned potatoes in a potato canning factory. And I often think about what it would mean to them if they were around, right, to see the way that I was able to take advantage of my education. And I think that that is something that is meaningful not just for me, but for my entire family, which is the experience of first-gen students, is that we're bringing our families with us.
Yeah.
It's not just about us. It's not just about what we want to study. It's not just about what we want our experience to be, but this is about our families, this is about our communities, and this is about the world that we're trying to build as it should be.
Carolina, let me ask you, as an immigrant to this nation, I'm imagining that one of the reasons your parents came here was to give you more opportunities. Mm-hmm. And when you turn to them and you say, oh, rather than going to this school where you can see the career path really clearly lined out, I want to go to this liberal arts Franklin and Marshall School up in Pennsylvania they might not have heard of. How does that go over? Like, what's that conversation like?
For me, my parents being, immigrants, they knew very little about the education system here, very little about the health system here. And I very quickly learned that I had to do a lot of things on my own. I mean, even as a child, first, second, third grade, once we started hitting division, like in Columbia, the way you do division is completely different from the way you do it here in the States. And so I figured, I never understood when they tried to teach me. And so I quickly learned that I had to do a lot of things on my own. And so I learned to ask a lot of questions. And when it came time to choosing colleges, they didn't understand what's the difference between a liberal arts college and, going to a university where you're just straight up going to a certain career. And so for me, I really looked for a place that would allow for me to continue asking those questions, that would challenge me. I knew I needed to find mentors because I had, every year, freshman year of high school was new for me and for my mom and my dad, and my little brother was coming up behind us. Sophomore year, it was new for all of us. And so I was kind of, breaking through, every year was different for me. And so that's,
yeah. And Katrina, let me ask you, you grew up in Pennsylvania, mm-hmm. and most of your friends who went to college, they went to Penn State, right? It was like Penn State's a great school, right? Like, why would you not go to Penn State? It's a fantastic school. Yep. Tell me about the process of deciding to not follow that path to Penn State and go in Franklin Marshall.
Yeah, so my high school was a public high school. It was basically like a pipeline directly into Penn State, essentially. But I didn't want to be just a number. in school. I wanted to know my professors and have them know me and be able to develop relationships with the people who were teaching me. And, part of the education system is potentially students teaching the professors things too. I wanted that experience. And like I said, I just didn't want to be a number. So that was one big aspect as to why I didn't just kind of go with the flow. That was natural for my high school. But I think the other thing that I loved about the liberal arts experience and what drew me specifically to F&M was what I had mentioned. I knew I wanted to be pre-med, but I love singing. And a lot of colleges and universities that have that one track, you don't get those opportunities. Even other liberal arts schools I was looking at, it was hard to do both. But at F&M, I got the feeling that I would be able to do both and thrive in both. Yeah. And that ultimately was the reason I said, look, I need to be the one to have the courage to break this mold and do what I feel is going to be best.
Dan, let me ask you, this was obviously important enough to you that you wrote a whole book about it. Yeah. Tell us, why'd you write the book? Like, what are you hoping to achieve with the book? And for the audience, what's the thesis that you're arguing?
So the book is called Mindset Matters: The Power of College to Activate Lifelong Growth. And the thesis that I'm offering is that today's world, the pace of change is escalating rapidly. Everything is changing. Every job, our information systems, the way we understand what work even is. Certainly demographically, the country is changing, the global order is changing. Constant change. Torrents of information, good and bad, flowing at us all the time. And one of the things I've seen in 20 years of higher education is that a student-centered education, which isn't everywhere, and there are certainly problems to be addressed, but a student-centered education can enable students to build growth mindsets that they can bring into their adult lives. And a growth mindset is the mindset that says, in the face of uncertainty, in the face of my own not knowing what I have to learn quickly, in the face of being given something to solve that I didn't ask to solve, but now I must solve, the growth mindset is the belief that I have the power within me to meet the moment and grow. That I have grown in the past, that I know that I've grown, that I know how to grow, and that I love growing. And so the book I wrote tells aspects of these three students, now graduate stories, and about 30 others. Like the way an anthropologist might do thick description and really get inside the student experience and say, Carolina Giraldo showed up at the doorstep of Franklin Marshall College as a midway through her senior year of high school, already hell-bent on creating her education. The question before was, what choices would she make to do that? And would the school provide the resources to encourage her to be the active leader of her own learning? And I believe that in all the discussion about higher education in its multiple forms, which are critical for the future of our country, most projections say that 70% of jobs in the future are going to require a BA degree. It's important that we also, while talking about money, talking about protests, talking about politics, talk about the eminence of the individual student's journey to create the life they seek and empower themselves to be able to give and grow their whole lives, because they are a grower. And so I carefully tell the stories of 30 students and what it was about the high-intensity, high-touch residential college experience that activated their growth mindset. And in doing that, I hope it will invite people to say about other schools, are we doing that well? Are we centering our work on helping students take over and drive their own education in such a way that they'll live the rest of their lives knowing, because they've done it, that I can create, that I can discover, that I can lead teams. And that's what I think is one of college's greatest callings for the world we live in today, to ignite each of them and everyone to believe that they, with their own talent and their drive, can create the life they want to lead.
So, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. I'd love for this to be a conversation. I'd love to hear your questions, your comments, your reflections, and really make it a dialogue with all of us. Before I do open it up, let me ask one question, which is, we're talking about college, but about half the nation, a little bit under half the nation, has not experienced post-secondary education. There's people for whom college is not the right place, right?
Definitely.
Community college is better, a trade school is better, entering the military and sort of getting your education, mentorship programs, much like exist in Germany and are coming here. So tell me a little bit, Dan, when you think about what you're talking about, teaching people to learn through the course of their life, how much of it is unique to the four-year institution, and how much of it are principles that actually we should be talking about everywhere?
I think we should be talking about them everywhere. Absolutely. That the fostering of growth mindsets can be done quite effectively in vocational programs, in two-year colleges, in work. Forget school for a second, in work, in the military. It's all about fostering growth mindsets. That's it. So this isn't to say that this is better. More, this is to say, what does it look like in the context of the residential college experience?
Right.
Where you have what's distinctive about that? You have the 24/7 experience, living and learning together around the clock. That's one thing. Secondly, college communities are teams of teams. All day long, these three and everybody else at Franklin and Marshall was on not one team, but 10 teams. The classes they attended, the residence hall communities they were part of, the activities they were part of, the job they went to, the athletics program they were part of, team after team after team. So you're developing a mindset for what does teamwork and collaboration look like.
Which is critical in
Which is
today's
critical.
economy. Absolutely.
But the big thing, and there's other things to say, the big thing is that when it's really working, the college environment, residential, surrounds each student with highly involved faculty and highly engaged peers. And that ecosystem is distinctive. That you don't get that in other models. Highly engaged adults present in your lives, they can each name 10 faculty, I bet, who were that, and other peers who are your model for what does it mean to push yourself, be your best, make your mark.
So let me go to the audience. Questions, comments, thoughts, and we have a mic. We have someone with a microphone over here. Let's go ahead and start with this woman in the zebra.
So this is a little bit of a self-serving question because I work for an organization that does community engagement with colleges, but it sounds very much like you created community on your campus, right? So you found community that worked for you. Can you talk a little bit about whether or not that also included the Lancaster community and like how you were out in the community and what that looked like?
And Franklin and Marshall is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, for those of you who don't know. Yeah.
And also, to be specific, it's pronounced Lancaster.
I guess we now know who's that.
There it is.
It's pronounced Lancaster.
In my job interview, I called it Lancaster, and the search committee started laughing.
My cab driver slammed on brakes. Yeah. But I would say the time that I spent in student government, it was twofold: internal, right, of everything that was happening on campus, and then working across our clubs and organizations that were actually external in the community. And so, I think we had, like service projects, right, in close proximity. And I think in many ways, F&M is an anchor institution in the Lancaster community, and not only in Lancaster, but come to think of it, there was a club that also did work that flew down to New Orleans, right, to help rebuild and constantly helping to rebuild, right? And so I felt that as a student leader, we all felt a sense of responsibility to the community.
The research agenda is also significant. All three did research, and many of the faculty, whether it's in the sciences or sociology or the arts, are engaging in community-based research not with TAs, not with research assistants, with the students. And one of the things I think that ignited in Carolina, your case, and Katrina, your case, your mindset to discover, which you then have taken to very high heights, was that you were involved in knowledge creation, like right off the bat. Like there was no intermediary between the scholar and the student. Is there anything about that to add?
Yeah, I would just say the fact that I could walk out of my undergraduate experience with 2 publications and a national poster presentation is insane. Like the fact that you can have that experience in a 4-year undergraduate education while still studying other things that you have passions about as well. really, I think, helped me when I was applying for medical school as well.
Completely agree. I did research in biochemistry, and it was thanks to my research at the Piero lab in Franklin and Marshall that I was able to get my first job out of college working for the University of Pennsylvania on HIV. And so they worked with a particular protein that integrates the HIV DNA into the human genome, and it's very hard to crystallize it. So I helped work with drug companies that are coming up with new systems and to crystallize the protein along with the drug to see if it would be something that would work. And to answer your question, in Lancaster, that's where I fell in love with medicine. I was involved with, I did a lot of shadowing with different physicians in Lancaster General Hospital. I was able to take care of moms and their babies and see my first open heart surgeries. And so that was a big part of why I decided to go into medicine.
So I just have to thank you all as a Penn State alum, but someone who went to the Philadelphia Public Schools and knew nothing about liberal arts education. My question is, I now serve on a community foundation as a director and trying to convey to our board members the importance of scholarships to liberal arts. How is it not defined as elitist? And that's the conversation we're literally having.
Yep, perfect.
And it is worth noting, most students graduating today, for the last 10 or 15 years, are graduating with these debt loads that seem to impact their life quite a bit.
Well, let me make a point on that just to clarify something. We set a cap on what the debt load could be. Families can take more, but we made sure that the way we packaged students' financial aid was that it was $5,000 a year, so $20,000 of debt. But the key thing is the aid policy was to meet full demonstrated financial need. That's what you should be asking of the institutions that accept low-income students. Are they meeting the full need? And we can discuss whether any debt is good or bad. I am not opposed to a reasonable, limited amount. But what about this other question then?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I don't think I would have been able to go to Franklin and Marshall without the scholarship the college gave me, which, like I said, I had a bunch of other colleges I was looking at, but they were so forward with showing me that I was wanted there, right? And that reflected in the scholarship package that they offered me in addition to Pell Grants and things like that. So I think we're opening up opportunities for people. It's pretty much the opposite of elitist, right? Like, there are people that truly would not be able to experience a liberal arts education without the financial assistance that colleges are giving, and that is invaluable. That created one more psychiatrist in the Army, for example.
Yeah.
Ma'am, right here.
So, and I wrote my question down so I wouldn't forget it, but given the increased prevalence in anti-DEI legislation, how can colleges and universities maintain and promote the benefits of a diverse educational environment while navigating these challenges? And then more specifically, how can they ensure that the education remains student-centered and that it's preserved and strengthened?
So I'll take a quick shot on the DEI question. There's 50 states and there's 50 different contexts, so it requires some sensitivity to the actual environment. But I think that developing financial aid policies that are need-blind and robust is the best DEI strategy out there. There's more to do, but provide scholarships and fellowships to give students opportunity pathways. Good things will happen.
But
Really
can
good
I add
things.
something on that, Dan?
Yeah.
Because I think probably no one in this room is like, nah, we need fewer scholarships. What's the friction? Is it that the people like us aren't giving enough money to fund those scholarships? Is it that we're not electing the right people? Why don't we have more scholarships?
So there's more ways to generate more resources for scholarships besides asking people to donate. Absolutely. And those ways include, I'll just say it fast and we can talk in detail. One is to increase the size of the federal Pell Grant, which has not kept up with inflation in the country. That's a big one. A Pell Grant given to any of these students benefits every student, partly because they're there, but partly because it gives more general money for the school for aid for all students. So middle-income students benefit from more Pell Grants because the aid budget gets bigger. That's first point. Second point, loan repayment plans that are well-structured so you pay a little early in your career is another really important way to reduce the tuition burden and the debt burden on families and students. And that there's more work that's been done in recent years in Washington. I think there's still more to come, but that's a big one, is not having big debt payments early in your career, having little debt payments, and doing the work that the three of them are doing, perhaps to have that loan forgiven at some point. And then a third really important thing that is being explored more and more is what can we do to bring down the cost of tuition. That's hard, but bringing down the cost so that less money is needed in scholarship. All that comes together in complex ways, and colleges are losing the battle to define affordability. But I would base it finally and mostly on this point. Having more students from more communities getting a quality education that unlocks the greatness in them is good for the one, but it's good for the many. And we have to invest in young people because we want to invest in all people in our country.
And let me ask, just to follow up on sort of the other thing you'd asked about, we're living in an age when affirmative action will not be allowed in admissions, when DEI on some campuses has become a punishable offense. Carolina, let me ask you, as someone who came to this country, tell us just real briefly about the community of others at Franklin and Marshall. How important was it that there were other folks who were first generation, who were immigrants, who were people of color? Did that shape how you were able to experience that school?
Yeah, it was huge for me. So during my freshman year of college, my father actually passed away. And that was one of the most difficult moments of my life. I had to rely on all of my peers from different backgrounds to kind of get past that. And there's also, I feel like there's this negative connotation when you talk about minorities and diversity, but there's so much vibrancy, there's so much we can learn. There's so much strength, especially, if you look at the Latin American culture, there's this warmth, that my patients take, that they get to enjoy when they come to see me, and they get to open up. And that's something that I want to be able to teach and provide to my other peers, like my other co-residents, that they don't have. So I think we need to look at diversity as something, take what you like from each different culture that you see, and then leave the rest that you don't like.
Let's go to Fidel really quickly, and then I'll come back over here. Thank you for that.
Thank you all. Wonderful panel. Fidel Vargas, President CEO of the Hispanic Scholarship Fund. So we do scholarships. So my background was in private equity. I've been in the job that I was supposed to be in for 3 years, for now 12, because I have the best job in the world. But we've learned a couple of things, and this is going to get to a question, but one of the things we learned is support services are actually more important than the money. And it's really interesting. You can get someone to college and then say, oh, they don't need any extra help, and then that's like pulling your offensive line when you're on the 1 yard line. That doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. The other thing that was interesting is there's a lot of scholarships out there that actually go unused. Yeah. Huh. Not for us. We have 100,000 applicants. We just selected the top 10,000. We also administer the Gates Scholarship Program. But the other thing that's really interesting, and this is about just not understanding financial aid. So most people, if you said, did you know that there are a group of universities in this country that if your family income is less than 150,000, they would pay for your tuition? Or if your family income is less than 85,000, they would pay for everything. And so a lot of our students are coming up and they're seeing, the news about Vanderbilt. It's $100,000 cost of attendance. What's the cost of attendance at Franklin and Marshall now?
I don't know exactly because it's been a couple of years. But
maybe 80.
It's higher, it's like 80.
Yeah, so let's just say it's 85,000. So if you're a first generation or an immigrant, or I loved what you said about, would you say structurally?
Poverty structured.
I love that, okay? So if you're from a poverty-structured environment and you just don't understand, and your daughter comes to you and say, I want to go to college, and you say, well, how much is it? 75,000. Well, no way.
Right.
You should go to community college. And the other thing that's interesting is, in community college, it's actually a longer road. It turns out to be more expensive for more students. And so the question is, to what?
Read my mind.
Yes, I'm sorry, but what are we doing? And this is to Dan. To demystify, because to me it's just a function of, we have this talk about how expensive college is, and what are we doing?
Well, I can't speak to what every institution is doing, but what we did was we built relationships with the schools, communities, access programs from which we were recruiting, so that it was a running conversation. I met Donnell his senior year of high school. I met Carolina her senior year of high school. Admittedly, I met Katrina her first day or second day of school. But we like building relationships so that it's not transactional, but it's dialogic. And there's a lot more to say about how to demystify opportunity. But one thing that's so important is to show the benefits of opportunity. What does it mean when people have a chance to create the education that they seek?
I think we have time for at least one more question. Sir, yeah.
Hi, I'm an undergraduate student, and one thing I've noticed amongst my peers is that there's a lot of passion to serve and a lot of eagerness to challenge themselves. But often, especially when it comes to first-generation students, even though they're getting some of the financial aid and the scholarships, they're tied to their GPA. And that's often a deterrence for them to challenge themselves. For example, join the student government, for example. So I wonder, when you tripled that scholarship amount, how did you try to balance that?
That's a very good question. I'll give it to you quickly. We developed a talent strategy, as we called it. And that talent strategy, we had to define what are we looking for as talent. And so this applied across the whole admission process for all students. We were looking in particular, yes, a college prep curriculum. You have to have taken a college prep curriculum, or this school wouldn't be the right school. It just wouldn't, it would be just too much. You go to community college, take that curriculum and come. But it had to be college prep. But after that, okay, it's a school where, one, you're taking classes that you didn't know you were going to take, like geology. 20 majors a year, but nobody ever took geology in high school. So curiosity. Are you willing to take classes that are open on a variety of topics? Second, very hard school. Are you a hard worker? Is that part of your ethic? Third, there's low grades at F&M. Can you bounce back from that and deal with that not as like a setback or an insult, but an opportunity to grow? Resilience. Fourth, it's a small school. We're not going to have anybody on stage acting if we don't have people that jump in. No one's going to go to the games if they don't jump in. So if you have a pattern of saying yes to opportunity, and then the biggest, those are talent, saying yes to opportunity, resilience, curiosity, and then a big one. Do you have a vision of education? That is actually a talent. Do you have a vision of why you're going to sacrifice and work hard and go with joy that brings you to that place? That is actually predictive of success. So the reason I knew Donnell's name before he knew my name was because we were recruiting highly motivated people the way Kentucky recruits 7-foot centers. I'm not kidding you. We knew who they were before they knew us, because we had partnerships with their schools and their access programs in their neighborhoods. So I totally hear you. I don't think grades mean nothing, but I think that it's a part of the picture, but the kind of curriculum you took to earn those grades is even more important.
We're almost out of time, and so I want to give the last word to the three of you guys, just real briefly. I think one of the nice things about a panel like this is you guys are still close to the college experience. You're still close to young people. All of us are old and crusty, and hopefully we'll make it. Not all of us. Not all of us. Not all of us. I'm just hoping I make it to the end of the day, without breaking my hip. So real briefly, what is for each of you? What is something that you wish we knew about life today, whether it's be education or what your lives are like, or things that we should be thinking about in the next week and month and year? Carol, take it away.
You wish we knew. I think from my college experience, and don't be afraid to create your own opportunities. When it comes to scholarships, there are plenty, that I applied, didn't get, or deadline passed. But if I showed my passion, I found the mentors, and they created the opportunities for me, right? They helped me along, and that's one really big thing when it comes to Franklin and Marshall College, the liberal arts experience. If you go out there and you fall, and I think college is the best place to fail, because the moment you reach out and you ask for help, there's not just one, but multiple hands that are going to go out there and help.
Yep. And then real quickly, I also want to make a quick clarification that I support and co-create our development strategies at Teach Plus. So I don't oversee the entire organization. I do lead our strategy work, so just for clarification. But the one thing I will say is that right now, colleges, right, are considered to be places like woke factories or coddled students. And I think that students really have lived experiences, right, that they are bringing back to their campuses, and they're not insulated from the world. And so to take their experiences that they're also coupling with research and scholarship, right, that they're then taking back to communities. And so we aren't insulated. We're actually coming back and impacting change, and that's what ought to happen.
I love that.
Yeah,
Katrina?
I'll keep it pretty short and sweet. College is the place where you can expand your horizons, expand your ability to dialogue with people other than yourself, and to be able to grow, as Dan said. That it is truly the most fruitful place to be able to do that.
Well, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Dan. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. If you do have other questions, I'm sure these folks would love to stick around and answer them. But let's go and make the world a better place.
Thank you.